Do you really want to let AI be controlled by bureaucrats and politicians? Or do you want to have creative entrepreneurs competing with each other? And we're seeing this froth right now of all of these AI companies trying to get the edge. What can we do next? How can we make this better? And it's like, I love the idea these guys are spending billions of dollars to try to make my life better. Why would you be opposed to that other than, well,
Hello, welcome again to another episode in the Let Fuel Prosper series. My name is Dr. Vance, Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to have on another guest, someone who's been fighting for abundance, to let fuel prosper, and for freedom overall. And it's none other than Dr. Gale Pooley. Gale, welcome to the Let Fuel Prosper show.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be with you.
Well, the honor's mine. I'm really glad to have you on the program, and I think we're going to have a lot of good discussion about, are we running out of resources? Is the population growing too fast? Is AI going to take over the world? We've got a lot of things to talk about. Before we get into that, for the audience, let me go ahead and read your bio, and then we'll jump right in. So, Dr. Gale Pooley was an associate professor of business management at Brigham Young University, Hawaii. Dr. Pooley is a fellow with the Discovery Institute and serves on the board of humanprogress.org. He also serves on the Foundation for Education or Economic Education Faculty Network and is a scholar with Hawaii's Grassroots Institute. He has published articles in many top outlets. His major research activity has been the Subsidies Index, which he co-authored with Dr. Marian Tupy. Dr. Pooley earned his BBA in economics at Boise State University. He did his graduate work at Montana State University and completed his PhD at the University of Idaho. We're also going to be talking a lot about his book, Superabundance, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an infinitely bountiful planet. I love that. And it was co-authored with Marian Tupy and published by the Cato Institute, where he is a senior fellow. And so with all that said, like I do with every guest who comes on, why do you do what you do every day?
It kind of started in 1972. I had to read a book by Paul Ehrlich, The Population Bomb, in one of my social studies classes. And at that time, I came from a family. We had 6 kids in our family. And I read this book, and it's like, wow, my parents have caused all of these problems on the planet. So I always kind of had this, feeling that, was he really right? And because I looked around, I looked, my life, and I thought, my life is much better than my parents' or my grandparents' life. So what's going to happen here? So in the early 80s, I go off to graduate school, and I hear about this guy named Julian Simon, and that he had been able to have this bet with Paul Ehrlich about the future, and basically said, look, Paul, here's all the data. We're not running out of stuff. In fact, the issue is if you're running out, why are things getting cheaper? And all these things were getting cheaper, primarily these non-renewable resources, where you think, well, if resources can only be atoms, and we have a fixed number of atoms on the planet, then we should be running out. And that wasn't the case. So he has this bet, and I was fortunate. I was up at Montana State, and he actually came to our campus and gave a little presentation. So I got to meet him and, looked at his bet and started reading all of his stuff. And I said, this guy's he's an economist, and he thinks about it. He's thinking about the world economically versus this biology perspective of, we're going to look at how cockroaches or rats function, and we're going to apply their behavior to human population. He says, no, human beings, they're different than all these other species. We innovate, and we have property rights, and we have language, and we have all these other features that allow us to overcome these kind of constraints of nature. So always kind of interested in that. And then followed him, the outcome of the bet. Of course, one of the most important checks in economics was written by Paul Ehrlich. He actually had his wife sign the check to Julian Simon, for $576. They'd bet on a basis of $1,000 worth of these 5 commodities: copper, chrome, nickel, tin, and tungsten. And they'd gone down by an average of about 36% in real prices. So, that was really interesting. And then, about 5 years ago, I'm on Twitter, and I see this little article by Marian Tupy, my co-author, and he said, I'm doing an update to the Simon Ehrlich bet, and he actually expanded it and looked at other commodities. So I reached out to him and says, hey, this is really interesting. Have you ever thought about doing time prices instead of trying to do money prices where we're adjusting from nominal to real? Let's do time prices. And that was another insight that Simon had offered, is you got to look at how much time it takes to earn the money to buy stuff. And so we picked these 50 commodities. We call them the basic 50. And we did this analysis from 1980. We said, well, let's look at the year that the Simon bet started. So we go back to 1980. And this was in 2017 or 2018. We looked at all these 50 commodities and we covered everything from energy. So we had crude oil, we had coal, we had natural gas to food. We had all these food items. We had materials like cotton and lumber. We had metals. So we have this data set, and the World Bank keeps track of all of these prices monthly. So we had a really good source to get the data. And then we divided all these money prices by hourly income to get the time price. So money prices are expressed in dollars and cents. Time prices are expressed in hours and minutes. So the real question is, what's happening to the time price over time? Are things costing you more time or less time? So to our, we were kind of shocked because we assumed that one of these, some of these commodities would have gotten more expensive time-wise, and not a single one of them did.
Wow.
In fact, the average time price had fallen by over 70%. And then this occurred at the same time that the world population increased by 70%. It's like, this is strange because Malthus and Ehrlich would say, as population goes up, things are going to get really expensive and scarce and we're going to run out. And the opposite was happening. You had more people and things got more abundant. So what theory explained that? So we went back to Julian Simon. He said, we transform atoms into resources with knowledge. It's knowledge that really is what is the difference between our age and the Stone Age.
Yeah.
Is the growth in knowledge. We had the same number of atoms on the planet we did, when Adam was here.
Yeah.
The Neanderthals. What's changed is is knowledge, and it's our ability to discover and share new knowledge that makes these things around us so much more abundant. So we write this paper, and we call it the Simon Abundance Index. We basically built this little model that says, here's what's happening. And when we got done with that paper, a number of people said, you guys should go beyond these 50 commodities. And so we have this framework with these set of equations. And we said, well, let's go out and look at other things. So we went back to 1960, and then we go back to 1850. And we started looking at everything that we could find where we had data for, and started comparing time prices over time. We went to the 1979 Sears Roebuck catalog and compared the time prices of a bicycle or clothing or a blender or a toaster. And what we discovered is basically everything is becoming more and more abundant. So then the search became, let's try to find something that's becoming less abundant. And the only thing that we found where the time price had been increasing were industries that were either highly regulated, or you had this government involvement in either the supply side or the demand side, or both sides. And what it led us to conclude is, if you let markets operate and you let entrepreneurs have their freedom to create, you're going to have this abundance that's going to get a breakout all around us. So that's the long answer to where I ended up.
Well, no, that's good. It's good, Gale. And I guess, whenever you were headed down this track, and Julian Simon's a great one, a great economist that talked a lot about these things as you were mentioning there. What do you think? What was the big tipping point for you on that sent you down that path of economics and Julian Simon and everything else? Was there a tipping point for you?
I was in college and I was an accounting major.
Okay.
And I had, you had to take an econ class. You have to take an econ class.
Yeah.
So it's like, I heard these bad things about it, so I keep putting it off. So I finally take my first econ class, and I take the class, and it's like, wow, this is really interesting. It's a way to look at the world that seems like it makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
And accounting, I still finished up my accounting program, but I said, I got to do econ.
Yeah.
And, accounting's interesting, but econ was very inspiring.
Yes.
And I felt like, look, you can see the future before other people do if you understand these economic principles.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? So that's kind of how the econ thing went. And I studied econ. I actually went into industry and did economic kind of consulting stuff. And then I came back into academia, 5-10 years ago. But it's a very powerful way to be able to understand the world, and more importantly, to know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right. Right. No, I love that, Gail. And I also did accounting and economics. I double majored in
Yeah,
undergrad because I really, when I got into it, I thought I wanted to be an accountant. I wanted to be a CPA. I was like, look, there's a lot of money. I was the first generation college student. So I was like, look, there's a lot of jobs. There's a lot of money. Let me
right.
go ahead and do that. But I fell into the same trap you did where I got into accounting and it was too much by the book. Debits equals credits, assets equals owner's equity and or liabilities plus owner's equity and all these other
Yeah,
things. And I was like, you know what? This is too much by the book. It fit inside this box. And I want to think outside the box.
yeah,
I want to think about the bigger problems that are out there compared to
yeah.
just the financial statements. Those are important. We need people to be doing that. But I also believe in division of labor and specialization. And we went down more of this path of looking outside the box and finding ways to let people prosper. And to me, that told the story more. To your point, it told more about the world and the way the world works, like through economics, compared to a lot of other things. And it's interesting too because a lot of people you talk to, and I taught for a couple of years, or a few years actually as well at universities, and it's interesting because when you ask a class, what do you think about economics? They'll usually say money, stock market, something, oil. I don't know. They'll mention something specific, and I was like, well, take a step back though. Markets are nothing more than people. People are the ones that are exchanging. It's not rats or something else. It's people, to your point about the ideas. The ideas matter, the knowledge that's gained over time. And so I love the way that you explained that. And the writing in your book, Superabundance, really explores that a lot more and a lot about this time of how much time it takes us to do something because it's very novel that we don't often hear a lot about in economics. Usually it's just measuring cost of living adjustments, CPI or something
Right.
along those lines. But when you think about that time, and it's not taking as much time for us to obtain these resources and they're cheaper and more abundant for us in the process, how might that influence the institutional framework of different countries? Institutions is something that I'm really get excited about. And I wonder, have you noticed this? Is this across all countries, or are some countries more abundant than others?
What we did actually, I think it's on page 146 in the book. We had 42 countries that we looked at, and we analyzed each one of those countries individuals. So we had these 42 countries that we used to form our basis for what we call the GDP per hour worked. So what we tried to do is look at how much GDP did we create and how many hours were worked by the whole planet. And that gave us a rate per hour. And that's what we used for this proxy of our hourly income.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at this list and you'll see, and we compared each country to the country itself, not to another country. So you have some countries that are on this really steep slope. China, for example, their wealth, their time prices fell so dramatically over the last 40 years because all these people suddenly were given this small measure of freedom to go out and begin to try to create wealth, that they're having this really hyper almost increase in wealth from there relative to where they were in 1980. So,
Yep.
in terms of countries, what it suggests is, look, if you want your citizens to be to escape poverty, there's this relationship between poverty and the freedom to innovate. It really is the freedom to innovate, which that means you got to have these things in place. You got to have some kind of private property rights, which then allow you to have a price system where you can then trade in a market. And then you have to be very tolerant of people who are out experimenting
Yeah.
that fail. And the U.S. is very, very. We think about this as land of opportunity and freedom. It's really this place where you can go fail
Mm-hmm.
and be forgiven and go try again. And that's what allowed us to be very entrepreneur friendly.
Yeah.
And so I think institutionally, it's like, do you have the institutions in place that allow people to feel like, hey, if I go out and create something, I'm going to be able to enjoy some of the benefits, at least, of my creative effort.
Yeah.
And and am I going to be able to talk about it with other people? Can I find other people that have resources that I need to help me? So those kinds of things I think are very important. And as you become a more and more regulated society, I think it's really this competition between entrepreneurs and bureaucrats.
Mm. Yeah.
It's really these two sides that have this continuous tension between each other. Do we want to have politicians and bureaucrats that are trying to manage an economy with the assumption that they know, which is really this it's a false assumption, right? This
Yes.
is
Yeah.
pretense of knowledge. Or do you want to have these entrepreneurs competing with each other to try to make you happy? Who's going to make you happier? entrepreneurs creating or bureaucrats regulating?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And I love the way you put that, because there is that tension there where you have the situation where entrepreneurs are out there to do entrepreneurial things, innovate, supply more things in the economy, and push us forward, help us progress, if you will. But bureaucrats are on the other side saying, okay, what are the costs and benefits of this? Often they look at the cost and not the benefits.
Right.
Yeah, I worked in the Trump administration for a year as the chief economist for the Office of Management and Budget, and OIRA was underneath OMB. So they do a lot of the regulating, right, across a lot of the economy and come up with this stuff. And our approach was, let's make sure we look at cost and benefits, because the
Right.
benefits may also be more than the cost. And so we wouldn't want to regulate it. And so that's why there was a lot of deregulation that was happening under that. And I think one could argue that it was more supportive of the economic growth that happened in that period than even the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, was the deregulation that happened during that period. And that's why I was so interested about your point about other countries, because even China, right? When we think
Right.
about as communist China, they were for a long time. And then what was it, about 1978, they started to deregulate. They started some market reforms where over that 40-year period you were looking at, you saw a lot of the expansion, the superabundance. Maybe some of that has slowed down some now with President Xi coming in and regulating. But I think with the private property rights, the free market capitalism, if you will, has really been the set the stage for so much of our growth and prosperity that we have today. I mean, you see that hockey stick where you have very limited growth of GDP per capita at very low level, and then it just shot up in the 18th century, a lot of the industrial revolution and things of that nature. And I wonder, given your work and time working on this, how might we be hindering our progress right now? Because one thing you mentioned earlier that I wanted to hit on was some of the industries have not had an increase in the time hours worked, right? To where, or it had a decrease actually, or it's taking us longer in those that are more regulated. Would that be more like healthcare, education, things of that nature, or which one of those in
Right.
particular?
Right. The two big ones, of course, are healthcare and education, and those are two highly regulated industries.
Yeah.
Government is either on the, it's on the supply side, restricting supply with accreditation and licensing, or they're on the demand side, subsidizing.
Yeah.
So you put those two together, and it's like, if you reduce supply and you increase demand, it's all going to show up in prices.
Yeah.
And so that's what we observe. So being able to subject those industries to more, what you need to do is you need to invite the entrepreneurs back into those
Yes.
industries. And this fundamental core to our economy really is, you've got to be able to recognize and provide dignity and respect to creative people.
Yeah.
The entrepreneurial types, because they're the ones that are leading us forward, out of poverty and helping us to escape. So a culture in the United States, we were very, very entrepreneur friendly, up until about 10, 15 years ago. And it's kind of shifted where now it's suddenly this, well, we're going to elevate celebrities, or we're going to elevate these people that are victims, or, it's this kind of wokey thing that's going on. It's like, you know what? Yeah, that's interesting, but you're not going to grow your economy. People are not going to escape poverty unless there are wealth creators out there, not wealth takers.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to go to that fundamental. Where does this come from? It comes from minds of individuals who are free to innovate and have been given the incentives and have a culture. You think about Steve Jobs. His father was born in Syria, his biological father. He was adopted, and he was fortunate that he was adopted, and he grew up in, Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And a very entrepreneurial friendly place. And you think about what our lives are like because this kid had this environment that allowed him to flourish and grow and manifest his talents and gifts. What if he had grown up in Syria?
Right.
And then the question is, well, how many Steve Jobs are in Syria today, or all over the planet, where there are these seeds that have, I kind of use this parable, this New Testament parable, where you have these seeds that are that fall on rocks, and they fall among weeds, and then a few of them fall in this place where they get water, they get sunlight, and then they flourish and they bear fruit. And the issue is, can we make the soil, the conditions in other parts of the planet like we had in the United States? And that's what we observed when we looked at China. They got a little bit of water, and they got a little bit of fertilizer, and suddenly all of these dormant or inactive entrepreneurs sprout up all over the place. So, can that be done on the rest of the planet? And it really back to this issue of, do you want to have bureaucrats and politicians trying to manage an economy, making decisions, or do you want to let these entrepreneurs, everybody? What it also suggests is that we don't know who these Steve Jobs people are.
Yeah.
So it means that you've got to treat everyone with dignity and respect. You've got to make this assumption that everybody around you has this potential to come up with this idea that could lift all of us.
Yeah.
So it also has this moral dimension to treating each other with the potential that that person could change the whole planet.
Yeah. Yeah. No, great points there. And one thing I'm reminded of is there are these different views right now and have been over time about income inequality. And when you think about inequality, then that has a scarcity mindset because there's not enough to go around. Some people are gaining at the expense of others. And there's been some different explanations for this. One has been a prominent one has been Thomas Piketty and his Capital of the 21st Century and talking about the super managers and how a lot of the money's just going to the top. And you hear about greedflation even nowadays of how businesses are just wanting that. And so all the money's just going to the top and they don't care about the lower income people and they're getting left behind. And I think there's some problems with that, but that's been one of the arguments that's been out there. Other ones that I've read quite a bit about are Claudia Golden's view of education and technology and how that had helped improve certain people, especially the educated versus others. And so that created this divide between the two. And then there are others like Why Nations Fail, Osomoglu and Robinson, where the institutions matter, kind of like what we're talking about here. But then there's also been some, I think, with your book, Superabundance, also DJ McCloskey talking about information and the knowledge and even how innovation works by Matt Ridley, I think is another good one of how all this stuff builds on each other over time to where it's not just one Steve Jobs. It was the number of people around that time, but they were able to have this flourishing situation to where they can exchange ideas and everything else. And so whenever you don't have that, you don't have the market working, which are many, many people, and you have politicians and bureaucrats, which are much fewer people, you're always going to have what Hayek called the knowledge problem. And it's going to create a
Right.
situation where we're not going to be as flourishing as we otherwise would. And I wonder, given your work, what do you think about these ideas of income inequality and other issues that may go to some? Do we really? Let me put it this way: do we really have a fixed pie, or are we really growing the pie over
Right.
time?
Yeah, and that's one of the takes that we make. One of the fundamental errors we made in economics, I say there were three fundamental errors. I call them the original sins of economics. One is that we define resources as only atoms can be resources, and I think that was an error. We convert atoms into resources with knowledge. It's really knowledge that is our resource, and there doesn't
Yeah.
appear to be any kind of constraint on undiscovered knowledge out there. How much is there really out there to discover? Resources, we got to move from thinking in atoms to thinking in knowledge. And then the second thing is we measured things with money. We should have been measuring things with time. You know, 6 of the 7 international units of measurement go back to time. Economics needs to be like the rest of science and measure things in time. And it's the time that really yields these more objective things that we can understand and get our hands around. We argue that there are 6 reasons that time is a better way to measure than money. And one of those reasons is equality. All of us get 24 hours a day. So what do you get to? We have this perfect equality of time each day. So we argue that a better way to compare people is, what do you get to do with your time? Because at the end of your life, all your income disappears.
Right.
And it's this time that really counts. And time, you can't inflate it, you can't counterfeit it, you can't buy it. If you could, rich people would never die.
Yeah.
So it's like, what do you get to do with your next 24 hours? And if you look at the world from this time equality perspective, we're much closer to each other than income equality, because we have this ability. What do you get to do today that's different than what Elon Musk gets to do today
Yeah.
with his 24 hours? And as we see this abundance grow, what we see is people are given much more time in their day to be able to pursue other things. They go from being strictly trying to subsist in life. If you go back to 1960 in India, it's like most people in that country, they worked all day just to feed themselves for that day.
Yeah.
Well, today, because the time price of corn and wheat and rice have fallen so dramatically, they spend an hour a day instead of 8 hours a day. That means they have 7 hours of time now to
Hmm.
devote to being creators, learning new things, pursuing other interests, being able to discover knowledge. It's like
Yeah.
as we move more and more people from this strictly consumption side of an economy to a creative side, with more time because they have more abundance, their needs are met. I got clothes, I've got food, I've got a house. What can I go do, to learn? We're going to see ourselves lifted out of this poverty if we can also at the same time encourage people, look, you can discover something. You can go out and learn something that nobody else knows about and share it with the rest of us in markets to
Yeah.
determine whether it's valuable or not.
Hmm.
So that idea of income inequality, it's I mean, it's like, well, that's interesting, but it's really not helpful
Yeah.
because we're always going to have this income inequality. But what we want to look at is what is happening to your life, not compared to somebody else. Jordan Peterson makes this point. He says, you're much better off to compare your life to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
Mm.
If you go back in time and look at your life, your parents' life, your grandparents' life, you can be nothing but profoundly grateful. If you go out and compare yourself to another person today, you're always going to end up resentful and envious because you can always find somebody smarter and richer and whatever than you are. So that perspective of being able to compare your life over time, I think yields a much more accurate way to think about, how our lives are getting so much better every day. Things
Yeah.
used to be really expensive.
Yeah.
People don't realize how expensive things used to be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, great points there, Gale, and it reminds me of time is money, and I think I love the way that you're putting that to work. Or time is money. I mean, that is
Yeah, we flip it. We say money is time.
money
It's
is there.
really
Yes, that's
time.
right.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
I like that. I like that
Money
even
is
better.
money is time. It's really time it's the
Yes,
time it takes you to earn the money because would you rather have more money or more time?
right.
If you have more money, you got more money, but you can run out. But if you have more life, if you
Yeah,
have more time, you can always that gives you the time to earn money. So
right.
time is actually more valuable than money,
Yeah, yeah. No, it's good.
especially when you get older.
Yeah. Yep, yep. And then you have kids like I do now, young kids. It seems like time's running out every day, but they're
Yeah.
different. There are different goalposts, I guess, that are going on there. Gail, as we're kind of wrapping up here, I'd like to get on into some policy discussion a little bit for the audience, if we could. Because one of the things that was coming to mind is trade. There's a lot of talk right now about protectionism and trade across the globe. And one of the things you were mentioning earlier, and we've been talking about it this entire time, is kind of on the abundance and resources. And maybe if we run out of resources in America, well, there's resources other places. I don't know if that necessarily is going to happen, but let's say that does. It seems to me, as more of a free market economist, that we need more trade with other countries, and whether or not some of these political or geopolitical implications with China and other places may have some concern, which maybe rightfully so. How do you see that from an abundance perspective, given that it seems to be to me, Gil, that many people have more of a scarcity mindset, that we're limited
Right.
to this. We've got to cut out the trade. We've got to cut immigration and things of that nature. But I wonder if more of this growth mindset or this abundance mindset might help us with these discussions.
That was the other original sin of economics is our perspective. We
Yeah.
got Lionel Robbins that said, economics is a study of choice under scarcity. And it's like, that's kind of interesting. It's true. We do live in a world of scarcity because people's wants are infinite.
Mm,
But what's much more interesting is how we convert scarcities to abundances.
yeah.
How does that happen? And we really can't measure scarcity because we're measuring it against an infinite want, but we can measure abundance,
Mm,
and that abundance is what has really been happening, and that's this growth in knowledge. So from this policy perspective, we recognize that every time a trade occurs, value is created for both parties. So anything you do to reduce this ability for people to find other people to cooperate with, really other people to make happy, where we make each other happy with trade, anything that reduces that, once again, ignoring this geopolitical stuff, anything you do to reduce that is reducing the value that's being created, the potential value. You're destroying value or you're preventing value from being created. Now you think about this. We got what, 7.4 billion people on the planet out of 8 billion, over 90% now have a smartphone.
Hmm.
Our ability to reach out, find other people to have these cooperative value creating relationships with is is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Never in the history of humanity have we had this ability to find other people to create value with. And and to think that we're going to have policies that are going to counteract this technology, they're going to prevent this technology from really allowing us to lift one another. It just seems totally insane that we would support it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. And there's a lot of things within trade that among not, it's interesting that we'll say, okay, it's okay to trade between states without any tariffs or other limitations. But yet if it's another country, when it's just other people, we forget that trade is really between people. It's not countries. China doesn't trade with
Right.
America, and Americans trade with the Chinese. And maybe there are some limitations that are there, but I kind of come at it from the Milton Friedman approach, where we should be open to trade with anyone, having as limited as possible, because we should be leading the way, not following the more government heavy-handed approach that some of these other countries are doing, because then that's also hurting Americans, making it more, less abundant for them
Right.
over time, along with immigration and other things. I mean, yes, there are some other implications we need to take into account, but make sure that the number one thing is to think about abundance versus the scarcity. I think is just so important of what you're saying there. What about with the AI? I know that's a big part of about innovation and human flourishing as part of the book. There are some who are concerned about AI and technology and the innovation that's taking place now, and maybe that there's some fear about what they're going to do to people. They're going to take our jobs. You've heard all these things before, Gale, but how do you put that into perspective for people you're talking to say, what, this isn't as much to fear about?
Well, I don't know about you, but the first time I saw Excel,
Yeah.
you remember that accounting
Oh,
major? I see
yes.
Excel and it's like, wow, my life has totally changed.
Yeah.
I can do things 10 times faster, 10 times more accurate at a price that's almost zero. And these tools, AI are simply additional tools that allow us to be more creative, faster, and with a lower cost. So I see this AI potential. I mean, if you look at some of these tools today, and we're just really kind of on the front end of it,
Yeah.
it's like, wow, this is going to make me a lot more productive, a lot more creative. I'm going to have insights I didn't see before. I can ask a question and get an answer in so much quicker than I could have before. It's like when you think about what Google did to the libraries,
Yeah.
AI is going to do that to this creative process of coming up with new ideas, trying to discover new valuable knowledge that we can then share with others. It has this huge potential to lift billions of people on the planet, out of just being consumers to being creators. We want everybody to be a creator. So I see AI as having this huge creative potential, discovery potential. And yeah, there's going to be downsides to it. There's always a down. I mean,
Yeah.
in economics, we're always looking at costs and benefits.
Trade-offs,
The issue
right?
is, the issue is, do you really want to let AI be controlled by bureaucrats and politicians, or do you want to have creative entrepreneurs creating competing with each other to see who? And we're seeing this froth right now
Yeah.
of all of these AI companies trying to get the edge. What can we do next? How can we make this better? And it's like, I love the idea these guys are spending billions of dollars to try to make my life better.
Yeah. Yep.
Why would you be opposed to that other than, well, they're going to create some kind of a thing? Well, we do that all the time. We
Yep.
create things that have downsides.
Yep. It reminds me of Thomas Sowell, right? There are no solutions, only trade-offs. And
Right.
that's exactly what's happening here, is that there are going to be trade-offs along the way. But just like your point about the Excel, you brought me back to those memories when I first really started using it for accounting. And I was a little scared at first. It was a little bit overwhelming of the fear of having to deal with it. But now I don't know my life without Excel, with all of the numbers that I run for economies and budgets and things of that nature. And the same thing goes with the horse and buggy when they got scared about the T model car. or when the computer first came around, or even the internet. I mean, it's these new technologies that we're fearful about in the beginning, but then later on, as you mentioned, we don't know what our life would have been like without them now.
Right.
And so I think that we've got to not just look at today, but also look at the future, and be careful about what we want. Because if we have more government come in and control things, they are going to, just by fact, what they normally do is they are going to hinder economic growth and possibilities for the future, that we need more of that. And so how will healthcare be improved, education be improved, so much of our life, manufacturing, construction, all these other things of our lives, if we don't have technological innovation? I just don't want to see that future. And that's why I'm such a big fan of free market capitalism over any other types of institutional framework. And so, these last couple of minutes that we have here, Gale, and this has been a great discussion that I hope the audience has enjoyed. What else would you like to share about maybe some of your work, or something about the book, or anything else that we've maybe missed so far?
I would just like to say is there's never been a better time in the history of humanity to create more life.
Yeah.
And these arguments that, we just read it constantly about, oh, we've got this climate issue, and we shouldn't have kids because of the climate, or we shouldn't have children because of all these reasons. It's like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at your parents and grandparents, and they lived at a much lower standard of living than we did. And they sacrificed so much to give us this much higher standard of living. And to say, well, yeah, grandma, you had 6 kids, but I can only afford 2. It's like, your kids are going to have more opportunities, more time
Yes.
than you ever imagined. And their lives, hopefully, are going to be lives filled with this creativity, where they're going to be able to contribute much more than we've ever seen in history. So look, once again, there's never been a better time to create more life.
Yeah.
And so that's, and I think the evidence supports that.
Mhm.
When have we had more abundance on the planet? When have we had more people with more time than we do today?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great way to end the conversation today, Gale. It's really a pleasure been talking to you today. Again, for the audience, the book is Superabundance. Go and check it out. It's a great book overall. Hope you'll buy a copy. And Gale, thank you for all the work that you do, and God bless you and your family.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for the audience, please leave us a rating and reviews anywhere that you get this podcast, and share it with your family and friends. And until next time, let people prosper.